It was a curious structure, white as bone and silent as confession. The locals called it the paper house, for its walls were covered entirely in letters. Letters pressed behind glass, sealed in varnish, layered over one another until no brick could be seen. A folly, some said. A shrine, whispered others. But to those who knew its owner, the enigmatic Miss Eveline Harrow, it was both a monument and a warning. It was on a particularly chill October morning that the quiet perfection of the paper house was disturbed. A scream, thin and tearing, rippled through the mist that lay across the Harrow estate. By the time the servants reached the drawing-room, Miss Harrow was lying by the hearth, her silk dressing-gown soaked crimson at the breast, one hand stretched toward the fire as though she had tried to reach something, perhaps one of her own letters fluttering in the draught. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Blythe, swore she saw a shape moving beyond the French doors before the police arrived. But when Inspector Crail searched the grounds, he found only footprints leading to the pond, and none returning. By noon, the matter had reached the newspapers. "Heiress found dead in her paper palace," cried the Daily Pictorial. "Mystery letters cover, scene of crime." It was the sort of headline that delighted one man and disturbed him in equal measure. At that precise hour, Hercule Poirot, seated at his breakfast table in Whitehaven Mansions, poured himself another cup of chocolate and sighed delicately. "My friend," said Captain Hastings, peering over his newspaper, "this business in Surrey sounds rather like your kind of affair. A woman murdered in a house made of paper. What an extraordinary image." Poirot's green eyes flicked toward him, then to the photograph on the front page. "Extraordinary, yes, mon ami, but also symbolic. Paper is frail, yet it conceals. One cannot see what lies beneath the topmost layer." "You mean the letters?" asked Hastings. "Ah, les lettres," murmured Poirot, folding his napkin with fastidious precision. "The English have a curious relationship with the written word. They write what they cannot say, and they conceal what they do not wish to be read. Yes, Hastings, I think this affair will interest me greatly." And thus, by the following morning, the immaculate figure of Hercule Poirot, moustaches gleaming like burnished silver, stepped out of a motor car before the gates of the paper house. The housekeeper greeted him with a nervous curtsy. "Everything's as it was left, sir. Inspector Crail said you'd be wanting to see it before we tidy up." "Quite so, madame," said Poirot, gently removing his gloves. "We must never disturb the scene before the mind has had time to, how do you say, compose its little symphony." Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and smoke. The walls shimmered with letters, hundreds of them, each, sealed beneath glass panes. The ink faded to sepia. The fire had burned low, and on the rug, the imprint of Miss Harrow's body still lingered like a shadow. Poirot knelt delicately, eyes sharp as a falcon's. "There is no weapon," he said softly. "None found," said Crail. "She was stabbed through the heart, something narrow and precise. Doctor thinks a letter opener, maybe." "Ah," murmured Poirot, rising. "How poetic. Killed by what she loved most." The word written upon paper. He turned to survey the room. A half-written letter lay on the bureau, the ink still moist. It read, "I cannot bear the burden any longer. Tomorrow I shall tell them the truth about—" And there it ended. "The truth about what?" said Hastings, frowning. Poirot smiled faintly. "That, my friend, is precisely what we are here to discover." The suspects present at the paper house. Mrs. Blythe, the loyal housekeeper, who claimed devotion, yet kept her own locked drawer. Mr. Daniel Harrow, the estranged nephew, returned from India 3 weeks before the murder, penniless and bitter. Miss Clara Venn, a friend or perhaps rival of Eveline's, known for her sharp tongue and her fascination with letters not addressed to her. Reverend Paul Eltridge, the family's spiritual advisor, whose sermons on guilt and repentance had lately turned oddly personal. Each would, in time, reveal a secret hidden behind paper walls. But for now, Poirot merely touched the letter on the desk, his expression unreadable. "Mon cher Hastings," he said, turning toward the light that filtered through layers of sealed envelopes. "This house, like all houses built on secrets, will burn, but not before it tells us why." And somewhere in the stillness, a single letter detached from the wall and drifted down to the floor, like a whisper too long contained. The afternoon light crept shyly through the gauze curtains, painting faint amber streaks across the parquet floor. The paper house seemed to breathe again, quietly, after the shock of the morning. Its silence was not peaceful. It was watchful. Somewhere within its walls, words long written had begun to whisper. Poirot stood at the center of the drawing room, hands clasped neatly behind his back, eyes moving from one framed letter to the next. He seemed to be listening, though no one spoke. Hastings, uneasy in the hush, shuffled slightly. "It's a strange place, Poirot," he muttered. "Feels like one could hear the house thinking." Poirot's mustaches twitched in amusement. "It thinks perhaps too much, mon ami. A house that remembers every word its mistress ever wrote. It cannot help but know the truth." He turned as the door opened. Inspector Crail entered, a stocky man with a ruddy complexion and an expression of professional skepticism. "Monsieur Poirot," he said gruffly, "I've assembled the household in the morning room. Thought you'd like to take them in turn." "Excellent," said Poirot softly. "We must bring light to where the shadows are fondest of hiding." As they crossed the corridor, Hastings leaned close. "Do you think one of them killed her?" Poirot smiled without looking at him. "In every case, Hastings, there is one truth I've learned. The murderer is always the one who feels most justified. Let us see who among them feels that way." The morning room was modest compared to the ornate drawing room, but its atmosphere was taut as wire. 4 people waited, each in their own corner of silence. Mrs. Blythe sat rigidly, her hands clenched in her lap. Daniel Harrow stood by the window, tapping a cigarette against his palm, though it remained unlit. Miss Clara Venn toyed with her brooch, her sharp eyes flitting from Poirot to the inspector and back again. And Reverend Eltridge sat by the fireplace, head bowed, as though already in prayer. Poirot greeted them with a courteous nod, his voice smooth and composed. "I thank you all for your patience. It is not pleasant to speak of tragedy, but truth, mes amis, demands a little discomfort." He gestured gently to Mrs. Blythe. "If you would be so kind, madame, we shall begin with you." The housekeeper rose, nervous, her apron corners twisting in her hands. "I'd been with Miss Harrow for 22 years, sir. She was particular, but kind. That morning I brought her tea at 8:30, same as always. She seemed distracted, said she hadn't slept. When I came back an hour later, she was gone. Gone from life." Poirot inclined his head. "And the French doors? They were open?" "Yes, sir, wide open. I saw someone or something moving through the mist, down toward the pond. Couldn't say who." "You did not call out?" She hesitated. "I was afraid, sir. Miss Harrow had enemies, though she didn't like to admit it." "Enemies, madame?" Poirot's tone remained mild, but his eyes sharpened. "Oh, not enemies as such. Just people who wanted what she had. That house, those letters. She said they were her legacy." Poirot's brow lifted slightly. "Ah, her letters. They were valuable. To her, yes. To others, perhaps for what they contained." Poirot thanked her gently, dismissing her with a nod. "We shall speak again. You have been most helpful." He turned to the man by the window. "Monsieur Harrow, the nephew, is it not?" Daniel Harrow straightened, his features handsome but weathered, his voice tinged with irritation. "That's right. I came back from Calcutta 3 weeks ago. My aunt had invited me. Said she wanted to mend old quarrels. Poirot tilted his head. And did she? Not really. We argued again the night before she died. He paused, jaw tightening. She accused me of trying to take advantage of her. I told her she was living in the past. Ah, murmured Poirot. Family affection. It is a delicate thing, no. Sometimes too delicate. Daniel scowled. You think I killed her for her money, is that it? Well, you're wasting your time. She told me she'd changed her will back in August. Everything was to go to charity. So if you're looking for motive, look elsewhere. Poirot nodded politely. Merci. I always look everywhere. He turned next to Miss Venn, who met his gaze with a faint smile. You were her friend, mademoiselle? Friend, perhaps once, she said coolly. Eveline and I corresponded for years. I admired her mind, her independence, but lately she became secretive, obsessed with those letters, as if they were alive. And were you here that morning? Yes. I came to return a book. I knocked. No one answered, so I left it in the vestibule. That's all. Poirot studied her carefully. And yet the servants did not see you leave. She arched an eyebrow. Then they weren't looking. For the first time, Poirot's smile faded. Perhaps not. But I am looking, mademoiselle. Always. Finally, Reverend Eltridge lifted his head. She came to confession 2 days ago, he said quietly. She spoke of guilt, of something she had done long ago that could not be undone. I told her that forgiveness was still possible. She said, not for me, not anymore. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. And you did not ask what she meant? I did, said the clergyman, eyes heavy. She said the truth was written all around her, that her house would remember even if she tried to forget. Poirot stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned toward the doorway. Inspector Crail, I wish to see Miss Harrow's study again. There is something there that waits to be understood. As he left, Hastings followed close behind. Well, Poirot, what do you make of them? Poirot's voice was almost a whisper. 4 souls, each wrapped in paper, and somewhere among their words lies the one that kills. He stopped at the threshold of the study, gazing at the fluttering letters that lined the wall. One had fallen to the floor again, the same as before. Only now it lay open, revealing the faint signature at its base. It was addressed unmistakably to Daniel Harrow. Poirot bent slowly, his gloved hand hovering just above the fallen letter. The ink had faded, but the name at the bottom, Daniel Harrow, was unmistakable. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he studied its placement on the floor, the faint ripple of ash where the fire's breath had licked the edge of the paper. Curious, he murmured, as Hastings leaned closer. It has fallen twice, n'est-ce pas? Twice since our arrival. That which insists on being seen, my friend, is rarely without meaning. He retrieved the letter delicately and examined the front. No date, no address, only the salutation, "My dearest nephew." He unfolded it, carefully. The handwriting was precise, the tone affectionate, yet within the lines there pulsed something uneasy. I have reconsidered what we discussed, Daniel. You must not return. Too much has been said already, and too many eyes watch this house. If I were to speak, it would ruin you, and others besides. Your devoted aunt, Eveline. Poirot's gaze lingered upon the phrase "too many eyes." He refolded the letter neatly, tucking it into an envelope he drew from his pocket. She warns him not to return, and yet he comes. He says she invited him, but this letter suggests the opposite. You observe, Hastings, how truth and falsehood dance together like polite partners. Hastings frowned. Perhaps she changed her mind. Family quarrels and reconciliations happen. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, you are kind. Always you assume the goodness of the human heart, but guilt, my friend, often hides beneath the mask of reconciliation. Come. We must ask Monsieur Harrow how it is his aunt wrote one thing and said another. They found Daniel Harrow in the library, pacing before a shelf of neatly aligned books, his cigarette now lit and trembling slightly between his fingers. When Poirot entered, Daniel straightened, defiant but wary. "What now, Monsieur Poirot?" "More questions?" "Only one," said Poirot, holding the letter between two fingers. "You told us your aunt invited you to stay here, yes? And yet this letter, addressed to you, advises precisely the contrary." Daniel stared at it. "I've never seen that letter before." "Ah?" Poirot's tone was soft. "Then she wrote it and did not send it? A curious choice to keep it among her walls." "Perhaps she changed her mind," Daniel said quickly, echoing Hastings' earlier words. "She wrote many things she never meant to post." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, and yet she kept them all. A house made of memory, of guilt, of unfinished truths. "Tell me, monsieur, what did you quarrel about the night before she died?" Daniel hesitated. The smoke curled upward in delicate spirals. "She accused me of betrayal," he said at last, "of betraying the family name. She was irrational." "Irrational, yes," murmured Poirot, "but only the sane make so careful a record of their madness." "Merci, monsieur. That will do." Outside in the corridor, Hastings lowered his voice. "He's lying, Poirot. You think he did it?" Poirot tapped his temple lightly. "The brain, Hastings. It must not rush to conclusions before it has arranged the pieces." "No, Monsieur Harrow lies. Yes, but not necessarily about murder. Lies are like paper themselves. They conceal as easily as they tear." He paused near the staircase, where the afternoon light glimmered faintly through a stained glass window. "It is time, I think, to speak again with the lady, Miss Clara Venn. There is something in her composure that troubles me. She watches too much, says too little." They found her seated in the conservatory, a place of brittle sunlight and pale orchids. She greeted Poirot with a smooth smile. "I wondered when you'd come, monsieur. Have you found your villain?" "Ah, not yet," said Poirot pleasantly. "It is an art, mademoiselle. One does not pluck the truth before it is ripe. Tell me, these letters on the walls, how well did you know of their content?" "I helped Eveline arrange them," she said. "She trusted me with the past more than anyone else. She said the letters were her confessions, her atonement." "Confessions," Poirot repeated quietly. "Then she had done something to atone for?" "She believed she had," Miss Venn said, a trace of sharpness in her voice. "But you must understand. Eveline liked her guilt. It made her feel important. She couldn't live without her secrets." Poirot's gaze softened. "And yet, she died because of one." The woman's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Poirot inclined his head in polite farewell. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A slip of paper resting beneath a potted fern, barely visible beneath fallen petals. He stooped and retrieved it. It was not one of the varnished letters, but a fresh page, written in the same hand as the unfinished note from the study. "Tomorrow I shall tell them the truth about Daniel, and about Clara." Poirot straightened, folding the paper with meticulous care. Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot. She was going to expose them both. Poirot's expression was unreadable, though a faint gleam sparked behind his eyes. Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps she merely wanted them to believe so. You see, the dead often speak. But we must decide which of their words still breathe and which are merely echoes. He glanced toward the window, where the fading light fell across the garden path. The mist had begun to gather again around the pond. Come, my friend. The paper house has not yet told its full story, but it whispers now, and soon it will shout. The air outside the conservatory had turned cool and wet with mist. Poirot stepped onto the terrace, gazing toward the pond where the faint outlines of reeds trembled in the breeze. Somewhere behind him, The old house creaked, its timbers settling, its papered walls murmuring softly, as if the letters themselves were restless. Hastings followed in silence, his brow furrowed with thought. "Poirot," he said at last, "you think Miss Venn and young Harrow were working together?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He drew his coat closer and studied the faint ripples across the pond's surface. "There is something in that idea. Yes, but not what you imagine, mon ami. They are bound, those two, by guilt or fear. Yet which of them holds the pen that writes the lie? That is the little question." He turned abruptly and began walking back toward the house. "We must see the study. Again, Hastings. There is a pattern to this house. An arrangement not of walls, but of words. One letter falls, another hides. Toujours, the pattern repeats." They crossed the hall. The lamps had been lit now, casting warm pools of light over the marble floor. The inspector was waiting by the doorway of the study, arms folded. "Find anything worth knowing, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked with a touch of impatience. "Everything worth knowing is already here," Poirot replied calmly, stepping inside. "It only waits for the right eye to see it." He began moving along the wall, examining the framed letters one by one. Hastings watched, bewildered, as Poirot leaned close to each pane, murmuring softly under his breath. Then he stopped before a section just above the fireplace. "Ah, regardez, Hastings. Here is what I sought." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "They all look the same to me. Bits of old writing under glass." "No, mon ami. This one, observe, the paper differs ever so slightly. The ink is darker, more recent. The others are brittle with age. Yet this one, this was placed here not long ago." He tapped gently at the corner of the frame. "And see, here is a fingerprint in the varnish. Someone replaced this letter after the death." The inspector stepped forward, frowning. "You mean the killer tampered with the walls?" "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "or perhaps they wished to remove something that would betray them." He reached for a small penknife from his pocket and carefully pried open the frame. The glass came free with a soft crack, and he drew out the letter inside. The handwriting was Eveline Harrow's, unmistakably neat. The first lines made Poirot's brows lift. "If anyone finds this, let them know. I was deceived by the one I loved most. I have sealed my confession here among my memories. The truth is in the pond." For a long moment, no one spoke. The inspector cursed under his breath. "The pond! So that's why the footprints led there." Hastings looked bewildered. But what could she mean by, "the truth is in the pond"? You don't think she meant— Poirot held up a hand. "Hush, Hastings. It is not the words alone. It is how she used them. La vérité est dans les temps. She writes in metaphor, but she also writes literally. Miss Harrow was a woman who blurred the two. The truth may be written and hidden there." He replaced the letter gently on the table, his mind turning. "Monsieur Crail, have divers searched the pond?" "Not yet. It's shallow, mostly silt and weeds, but we can have a look first thing in the morning." Poirot nodded. "Do so, and make certain they look not for weapons, but for words." The inspector blinked. "Words?" "Oui, words. Something written, perhaps sealed. A woman who hides her truth behind glass will not cast it away without protection." Later that evening, after the inspector had gone, Poirot sat alone in the drawing room, the fire whispering low. Hastings returned with tea, but found his friend deep in contemplation, staring into the flames. "She knew she was going to die," Poirot said quietly. "Her letters, her confessions, were her legacy, but one of them she did not trust to the wall. That is the letter someone feared. You think that's what's in the pond?" Poirot looked up, his expression grave. "I think Miss Harrow wrote her own epitaph, Hastings, and someone tried to drown it." At that moment, a soft knock echoed through the hall. Mrs. Blythe entered, her eyes red-rimmed. "Begging your pardon, sir, but there's something strange in Miss Harrow's desk. I only noticed because of the light. There's a drawer I can't open. It's locked from the inside." Poirot rose at once. "From the inside, madame? How curious indeed. Lead me to it." They crossed to the study once more, the shadows stretching long behind them. The old desk sat near the window, elegant but solid. Poirot bent, examined the tiny brass lock, and pressed his ear against the wood. Inside, something faint shifted, a soft scrape like paper against metal. He smiled, very slightly. "Ah, mon cher Hastings," he murmured. "The house keeps its secrets, but not for long." With a deft flick of his penknife, the drawer sprang open. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, lay a sealed envelope, dry despite the damp air. Across it, in the same precise hand, were written 5 words, "To be opened only after." Poirot held the envelope delicately between thumb and forefinger, his eyes narrowing as he read the words again. "To be opened only after." He did not speak for several moments. The fire crackled faintly behind him, and Mrs. Blythe waited with the restrained stillness of someone who feared what might come next. Hastings, leaning close, whispered, "After what, Poirot? After her death?" Poirot turned the envelope slowly in the light, examining the edges. "It is the question, yes. After what? After a confession, a revelation, a crime. Or perhaps after the truth itself has been uncovered." He held the letter up to the lamplight. The paper was thick, sealed with wax. Through the faint translucence, no writing could be seen, only the faint impression of something folded within. Poirot sighed softly. "We cannot yet open it. To break a seal prematurely is to disturb the rhythm of truth. No, Hastings, we must first let the house speak a little longer." He slipped the envelope carefully into his pocket, turning to Mrs. Blythe. "You are quite sure no one else knew of this drawer?" "Positive, sir. Miss Harrow kept the key on her ring, but I never saw her use it. I thought it was decorative." "Nothing is merely decorative to a woman who surrounds herself with meaning," Poirot murmured. "Merci, madame. You have done well." When she left, the silence that followed was heavy, filled with the delicate rustle of the old letters along the walls. Poirot began pacing slowly, the measured rhythm of his steps echoing faintly on the wooden floor. Hastings watched him anxiously. "I don't like it, Poirot," Hastings said. "All these hidden notes, confessions, warnings. It feels like walking through someone's mind after they've gone mad." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but madness, Hastings, is only logic pushed too far. Miss Harrow believed that by preserving her letters, she could preserve herself. Perhaps she feared disappearance. Perhaps she knew something was coming that would erase her name unless she wrote it first." He stopped suddenly, eyes fixed on the mantel. And yet her final act was not to write, but to hide. Hastings followed his gaze. "You think she hid something else?" "I know she did," said Poirot quietly. "This envelope, the letter in the pond, the newer note in the frame, they are all part of a pattern. Someone else, too, understood her love of words and turned it against her. The murderer did not strike her for gain, but for silence." A light knock interrupted them. Inspector Crail entered, his coat damp with mist. "We've just finished searching the pond, Monsieur Poirot. Found something you'll want to see." Within minutes, they were standing at the pond's edge, lanterns throwing trembling reflections across the water. A constable held up a small metal box, its surface encrusted with mud and algae. Crail gestured to it grimly. "Found this wedged under the roots, locked tight." Poirot took it with a delicate motion, brushing away the muck. "Ah, brass. Old, but not ancient. And see, Hastings, the lock is fine, precise, like the mind of the woman who owned it. May I?" Crail handed him a small key they had found nearby, tangled in reeds. Poirot inserted it, and with a soft click, the lid opened. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, were several folded pages, letters, but different from the others. These were unsigned, written in a hurried masculine hand. The ink bled faintly at the edges where water had seeped through. Poirot unfolded the first. You must keep my name out of this. If the truth comes to light, they will destroy me, and you as well. Burn the letters, I beg you. The second, I cannot bear the sermons, the threats, the pity. You said he would be silenced, and yet he continues. You promised me peace. Poirot's brow furrowed. He laid the final sheet upon his palm. The handwriting trembled toward illegibility, as though written in fear. It is done. You will never speak of him again. But if I am found, remember, it was you who asked it of me. Crail swore under his breath. Good Lord, she was blackmailing someone, or helping to cover a crime. Poirot said nothing for a long while. His face had become unreadable, carved in quiet thought. At last, he spoke, almost to himself. So, a woman burdened by guilt, a man desperate, to be forgotten, and a priest who preaches of repentance. The threads draw tighter, my friend. Hastings frowned. You think the Reverend's involved? Poirot's eyes glinted faintly. Perhaps. The handwriting, it bears resemblance, though altered. But what interests me more is not who wrote these words, but who found them before I did. For someone removed the confession from her wall and threw these into the water. They wanted them drowned, not destroyed. He closed the box gently, as though sealing a secret once more. The house of paper, Hastings. It was never about vanity. It was a defense, every letter a layer of armor. But even paper burns, and when it burns, the truth shines through the ashes. They walked back through the mist, the lantern light flickering against the white facade of the paper house. Behind the windows, the sealed letters gleamed faintly in rows like frozen eyes. Poirot paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the upper floor where Eveline Harrow had once written her endless confessions. She hid her truth among her words, he said softly. Now someone hides behind hers. Hastings shivered. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, said Poirot, slipping the sealed envelope from his pocket, we open this and see which soul it condemns. The following morning dawned pale and soundless. A faint frost clung to the garden, silvering the pond where the night's mist still lingered. Inside the paper house, the air felt tighter somehow, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Poirot sat at the breakfast table, the sealed envelope before him, untouched beside a cup of steaming chocolate. Hastings watched with curiosity mixed with unease. You've been staring at it for half an hour, Poirot, he said finally. Aren't you going to open it? Poirot's fingers rested lightly upon the wax seal. Not yet, Hastings. When one opens a letter, one alters the moment of its meaning. It must be done at precisely the right instant, when every other piece is in its proper place. Otherwise, one reads the words but fails to understand their soul. Hastings sighed. You and your little grey cells. Meanwhile, a murderer walks free. Poirot gave a faint smile. Ah, but not for long, mon ami. The murderer is already bound by the very thing they hoped would save them, Miss Harrow's obsession with paper and permanence. Every lie they told her was preserved. Every truth they buried has left its indentation. One only needs to feel the texture of deceit. Before Hastings could reply, the door opened. Inspector Crail entered briskly, his boots leaving damp prints on the floor. We've verified those letters from the pond, Monsieur Poirot. The handwriting's been compared with samples from Reverend Eltridge's church ledger. I'd wager half a sovereign they're his. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. But wagers, Inspector, are for men uncertain of their truth. Let us hear instead what the good Reverend himself says. They found Eltridge in the morning room, seated near the window where light filtered weakly through lace curtains. He appeared pale, almost spectral in the wan glow, his fingers turning a small cross over and over in his hands. When he saw them, his lips tightened. "I hear," he said softly. "You have found something." "Indeed," said Poirot, his tone courteous yet edged with precision. "A box in the pond. Inside it, letters written by a man of faith. Letters that speak of guilt, fear, and a promise made to silence a voice. Tell me, Monsieur le Curé, why did Miss Harrow keep them?" Eltridge closed his eyes briefly, as though in prayer. "Because she could not forgive herself. I came to her years ago when my sister died. There were rumors, ugly, cruel. Eveline helped me. She took the blame upon herself for an act that was mine. A mercy, you might call it, though it destroyed her peace." Poirot's gaze was sharp, but not unkind. "An act that was yours? You speak perhaps of violence?" The Reverend hesitated. "It was an accident. There was a man, an intruder who tormented her with letters of his own. She struck him. I found her, distraught, and together we buried the truth. Those letters you found, my letters, were written to beg her to forget it, to burn the past. But she could not. She built this house to contain it." "Then why?" Poirot asked softly. "Did someone murder her now?" Eltridge's voice broke faintly. "Because she meant to confess. She told me she had written something that would name us both. She said she could no longer bear the weight. I tried to dissuade her, but—" He stopped, shaking his head. "When I left her that night, she was alive. God help me. I thought she might finally find peace." Poirot regarded him in silence. "You lie, monsieur, but only in part. Your guilt is old. It smells of dust, not of blood. But there is another whose conscience is still fresh, still bleeding." Hastings blinked. "You mean Daniel Harrow?" Poirot did not answer. He turned suddenly toward the doorway. "Mrs. Blythe," he called softly. The housekeeper appeared at once, her hands folded, eyes wary. "Madame," he said, "on the night of the murder, you heard the scream. But before that, did you hear voices?" Her eyes flickered. I heard Miss Harrow arguing with someone. A man's voice. I thought it was the Reverend's at first, but no. Softer. Younger." "Merci," said Poirot. "That is enough." He faced the inspector. "Send for Monsieur Harrow, at once." Within minutes, Daniel appeared, pale but defiant. "What is this about?" Poirot gestured toward the envelope on the table. "This, monsieur, may answer for you. Miss Harrow left this sealed, written in her own hand. She meant it to be opened after. I believe she meant after her death, and after the conscience of her killer began to tremble." With deliberate care, Poirot broke the seal. Inside was a single page, the handwriting steady and unmistakable. He read aloud. "If anything should befall me, it will be by the hand of one I tried to love as a son. He came to me not for reconciliation, but for what he believed was hidden here. He thinks I possess letters that could ruin him. I have forgiven him, though he will never forgive me for knowing the truth." Daniel's face drained of color. "She's lying. She always lied." Poirot raised a hand. "Ah, non. It is you, monsieur, who lie. To yourself most of all. You feared she held the proof of your embezzlement in India. You sought to retrieve it, to silence her when she refused. But in the end, she did not need to speak. Her silence condemned you." The room fell utterly still. Outside, the frost melted from the windows, trickling down like tears. Daniel's trembling hand brushed against the chair, then fell limply to his side. Poirot stepped forward, voice soft but final. "The truth, you see, was not drowned in the pond. It was written in her every word, and it has found its way back to the surface." He turned toward Creil, nodding once. "Inspector, the murderer awaits your duty." Daniel did not protest as the handcuffs clicked shut. He only whispered, hollowly, "She said she forgave me." Poirot's gaze softened. "Oui, monsieur. But forgiveness, alas, does not erase consequence." The clock on the mantel struck noon, its steady chime echoing through the hushed rooms of the paper house. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky pale as parchment. Yet inside, the air remained heavy, as though Eveline Harrow's presence lingered, woven into every letter that gleamed upon the walls. Poirot stood at the center of the drawing-room, motionless, his gaze fixed upon the fire. Inspector Crail had taken Daniel Harrow away scarcely an hour ago, and though the sound of the departing car still seemed to vibrate faintly through the air, a strange unease remained. Hastings broke the silence first. "Well, Poirot, I suppose that's that. Justice done, eh?" Poirot turned slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "Justice, perhaps. Truth, no. There is still something that does not rest well in my little grey cells. A thread, how do you say, a thread left dangling." Hastings frowned. "But the letter named him. She wrote it herself." Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, and yet Miss Harrow was a woman of precision. Every letter she wrote was deliberate, every phrase chosen. And that letter, the one in which she accused her nephew, it is not written in her usual hand. The flow, the slant, it lacks her restraint. There is an emotional tremor, as though her words were pushed upon her." "You mean forged?" "Not entirely forged," said Poirot quietly. "More guided. Someone may have helped her to write it, or dictated it. A dying woman, frightened, perhaps. Confused. It is possible." Hastings blinked. "But who?" "Surely not the Reverend. He was terrified of scandal." Poirot did not answer. He had moved closer to the mantel, where one of the framed letters still hung slightly askew. His hand lifted and straightened it, and as he did so, he murmured, "Eveline Harrow believed her house could preserve her. She hid the truth within words because she trusted no one with speech. Yet there was one she trusted enough to let near her walls." He turned sharply. "Madame Blythe." The housekeeper entered at once, her hands still dusted with flour. "Yes, sir?" "You have been most helpful, madame," Poirot said, his tone soft but deliberate. "You knew her habits well, her letters, her keys, even the hidden drawer in her desk. Tell me, were you also the one who brought her writing paper from the village?" Mrs. Blythe hesitated, eyes flicking toward the floor. "Why, yes, sir, I did. Every fortnight, the same stationer." "And the day before her death?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Did you go then?" Yes. She'd sent me for ink, the special kind she liked." Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Madame, you told us that when you found her body, the French doors were open, yes? That you saw a shape outside?" Her throat worked. "Yes, sir, I did." He nodded gently. "But it was not Daniel Harrow you saw, was it?" She swallowed hard, her composure faltering. I don't know what you mean." "Ah, but you do," Poirot said almost tenderly. "You loved her, did you not? Not as a servant loves a mistress, but as one worships the object of their devotion. She was everything to you, your purpose, your belonging. When she spoke of confession, of giving away her secrets, you grew afraid. For if her truth came out, she would be destroyed, and you with her." Mrs. Blythe's voice trembled. "You don't understand. She wasn't well. Those letters, those awful letters, they tormented her. She'd sit there for hours reading them, crying, saying they spoke to her from the past. I only wanted to save her from herself." Poirot's eyes were filled with quiet sorrow. "So you wrote the last letter for her. You made her accuse her nephew, knowing it would end the torment." The woman's hands clenched in her apron. "He did torment her, always asking for money, always sneering at her letters. He made her ashamed of her life, of the only thing that gave her peace. When she said she wanted to tell the truth, I thought, if I could make her see him for what he was, if I could stop her." Her voice cracked, the words dissolving. Poirot spoke gently. "You meant only to frighten her. But she struggled, yes? There was a moment, perhaps an accident." Tears welled in Mrs. Blythe's eyes. "She fell, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it. I tried to help her, but there was blood, so much blood. And then I heard someone coming. I panicked. I thought, if they found her like that, they'd blame me. So I wrote the letter, sealed it, and put it where she'd have kept it. I thought it would protect her. Protect us." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "But you see, madame, lies written in the name of love are still lies. They do not protect. They imprison." Her sobs broke softly into the quiet. Hastings turned away, deeply moved, while Poirot stepped forward and placed a hand lightly upon the woman's shoulder. "You have loved too fiercely, Madame Blythe. It is a dangerous thing to love without reason." Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed on the gravel. Creil returning. Poirot looked toward the door, his expression unreadable. "Inspector," he said when the man appeared, "our case has taken a turn. The nephew is innocent of the act, though guilty perhaps of cruelty. The truth lies here, within these walls of paper, and in the heart of the woman who sought to keep them unburned." Creil looked from Poirot to the trembling housekeeper. "Good Lord, you mean she—" Poirot nodded. "Yes, it was love, not greed, that killed Miss Harrow. And love, I think, will haunt this house far longer than guilt." As Mrs. Blythe was led away, Poirot turned once more to the shimmering walls. He reached out and touched one letter gently with a fingertip. "She built her house of words to endure, Hastings," he murmured, and in the end it did. "Every lie burned away, but her truth, her pain, her humanity remains." He straightened his cuffs, his voice soft as the settling air. "Come, mon ami, our work here is done. The paper house has spoken at last." The day waned into a dim amber dusk, and the paper house stood silent once more. The servants had gone. Inspector Creil had left with Mrs. Blythe in his charge. A strange hush settled upon the estate, the kind that follows revelation, heavy but not yet at peace. Poirot lingered in the drawing-room, gazing at the varnished walls where the countless letters shimmered faintly in the flicker of firelight. Hastings watched him from the doorway, hesitant to interrupt the stillness. "You've been quiet ever since they took her away," Hastings said softly. "It was tragic, yes, but surely the matter's finished now." Poirot's eyes never left the wall. "Finished?" he repeated, the word lingering on his tongue. "Non, mon ami. The curtain has fallen, yes, but the play is not done. There is something beneath this final act that troubles me greatly. The tragedy of Miss Harrow is one of love turned to delusion, yet it is not only her story that was written here." Hastings frowned. "But Mrs. Blythe confessed. She admitted to writing that letter, to trying to protect Miss Harrow. What more could there be?" Poirot turned to him, his expression grave. "A confession, Hastings, is a dangerous thing. It gives comfort to the weary and closure to the impatient. But the truth, that elusive creature, it often hides behind the confession, using it as a mask. No, there remains a shadow in this house, a quiet one, subtle, but it moves still." He crossed to the bureau where Eveline's unfinished letter still lay. The ink had dried now, a dark glisten in the lamplight. Poirot lifted it carefully, reading once more the broken words. "Tomorrow I shall tell them the truth about Daniel and about Clara." He tapped the page lightly with one finger. "You see, Hastings, Clara Venn, her name remains unaddressed, unresolved, and yet she sits quietly among us, unaccused." Hastings hesitated. "But Poirot, she wasn't even here when the murder happened. She said she left her book in the vestibule and went home." Poirot smiled faintly. "She said she left. But you recall Mrs. Blythe's first statement. She claimed to have seen a figure moving beyond the French doors before the scream. A man, she said, but her fear, her loyalty, might have made her see what she wished. The truth, Hastings, may have worn a different silhouette entirely." Hastings looked startled. "You think it was Miss Venn she saw?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Consider it, mon ami. Miss Venn, clever, sharp, accustomed to dealing in secrets not her own. She was close to Miss Harrow, perhaps too close. She knew of the letters, even helped arrange them. She alone could have known where the unsealed ones were kept. And there is something else, something I have not yet told you. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small folded scrap of paper. This I found in the fireplace this morning, half turned to ash. It bears part of a signature, CV, and the words, "I cannot let her ruin me." Hastings' eyes widened. Good heavens, Poirot! Then Clara Venn had a motive. Just so, Poirot said quietly. And yet she allowed Daniel Harrow to be accused without protest. It was convenient, you see. His quarrel with his aunt was known, his greed apparent. A perfect scapegoat. And Mrs. Blythe, poor soul, in her blind devotion, sealed the illusion with her false confession. But behind them both, someone guided the story, wrote its ending as one writes the closing page of a novel. He turned, his gaze sharp now, alive with purpose. She must still be here. They found Miss Venn in the conservatory, where the last of the daylight filtered through the glass ceiling, falling in muted gold upon her face. She looked up as they entered, serene, almost expectant. "You've come back," she said. "I wondered if you would." Poirot approached her slowly. "Mademoiselle, I come always where the truth remains unsaid. You have watched all this unfold with remarkable calm. Tell me, how does one find such composure after the death of a dear friend?" Her smile flickered. "Because, Monsieur Poirot, some deaths are mercies." He inclined his head slightly. "Huh? Then you admit that Miss Harrow's torment had gone too far?" "She was unraveling," Clara said quietly. "Those letters consumed her. She was not the woman I once knew. Every page she kept was a blade she turned upon herself. I tried to help her see that, but she would not listen." "Indeed," said Poirot softly. "And so, when persuasion failed, you chose a more final method?" She went still. The smile vanished. "You think I killed her?" "I think," Poirot said, his tone suddenly sharp, "that you guided her hand to write that final letter, the one that condemned her nephew, and that afterward, when her conscience faltered, you silenced her." Clara rose slowly, her expression cool but trembling faintly at the edges. "You have no proof?" Poirot stepped closer, holding out the burned fragment. "This, mademoiselle, I found among her ashes. It was part of a letter you meant to destroy. She wrote to you, begging you to leave her secrets alone. You feared she would reveal your theft of her correspondence, the ones she trusted only you to keep safe. You could not allow her to expose what you had done." Her composure cracked like glass. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Those letters, some of them were about me. She wrote things that weren't true, lies that would have ruined me. I only meant to take them away, to burn them. But she tried to stop me. She fell." "Ah," murmured Poirot. "So again, the murderer hides behind the word accident. Always convenient, that little word." Clara's voice faltered. "I didn't mean for her to die." Poirot's gaze softened, though his tone did not. "No, mademoiselle, few do. Yet the truth, like ink once spilled, cannot be gathered again." As she sank into the chair, trembling, Hastings exhaled slowly, the full weight of it settling in. Poirot turned toward the fading light, his eyes distant. "The paper house," he said softly, "was never about remembrance. It was about fear, the fear of being forgotten and the fear of being known. Miss Harrow built her walls to contain the truth, but in the end, it was truth that tore them down." He looked once more at the woman before him, broken now, her voice no louder than a whisper, and added, "You see, mademoiselle, a house built of words will always betray its silence." The conservatory had fallen into silence, save for the faint patter of rain against the glass ceiling. The light had faded to the pale blue of early evening, soft and cold, casting Clara Ven's face in delicate shadows. She sat motionless, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed not on Poirot, but on some point far beyond him. Her voice, when it came, was hollow and distant. "You make it sound so deliberate, Monsieur Poirot, but you cannot understand what that house did to us. What she did. Eveline gathered our lives, our sins, our words, and trapped them on her walls. None of us could breathe beneath them." Poirot regarded her with quiet intensity. "And yet, mademoiselle, you returned again and again. You could have left her to her obsessions. Instead, you remained even after she ceased to trust you." "She did trust me," Clara whispered, her eyes gleaming. "More than anyone. She let me read them, those letters, because she said I could help her arrange them properly. But then, one evening, I found one with my own name. She had written about me to someone, about how I was jealous, how I coveted her peace. Lies, all of them. She was going to add it to the wall the next morning. I couldn't let that happen." Hastings shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot's expression remained unreadable. "So you came back that night?" "Yes." Her voice trembled, but there was no denial in it. "She was alone. The fire was burning. I told her she couldn't put that letter up, that she had no right to define other people's lives with her words. She said she had to, that the letters were her redemption. She called them her confession." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his tone almost tender. "And you, mademoiselle, what did you call them?" Clara met his gaze, defiance flickering in her eyes. "Punishment." The word lingered between them, heavy as a stone dropped into deep water. Poirot nodded slowly as though he had expected it. "So you quarreled. Perhaps she threatened to expose you, and in that moment, anger, fear took hold." "It wasn't like that," she cried, rising suddenly. "She lunged for the letter. I only tried to stop her. She stumbled. The fire was behind her. She fell, and when I saw the blood, oh God, there was so much. I froze. I thought she was dead already. Then the housekeeper came running, and I slipped out the side door before she reached the room. I didn't mean to kill her." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "No, mademoiselle, you did not mean to. But intent does not erase consequence. You see, Miss Harrow was a woman who wrote her truth into permanence. You too have written yours, only in a different kind of ink." For a long while there was no sound but the steady fall of rain. At last Clara sank back into her chair, her strength spent. "So this is how it ends," she murmured, "with her house full of letters, and mine empty." Poirot looked toward the glass ceiling where the faint light shimmered. "No, mademoiselle. It ends with silence, because that is what you wanted, is it not? To silence her, and now to silence yourself." The door opened quietly behind them. Inspector Creole entered, his face grave. Poirot gave a small nod, and the inspector understood. Clara Ven rose without protest. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she turned once more to Poirot. "Tell me one thing," she said. "If she hadn't written about me, if she'd left my name untouched, would you still call me guilty?" Poirot's eyes, deep and luminous, met hers. "Guilt, mademoiselle, is not born of what others write. It is born of what we cannot forget." She looked away then, her shoulders stiffening, and allowed herself to be led out into the darkening hall. When she was gone, Hastings released a long breath. "Good Lord, Poirot, I never imagined. All that over words." Poirot smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "Over words, yes. But words, Hastings, are not merely ink on paper. They are lives, reputations, desires. To a woman like Miss Harrow, they were her immortality. To another, like Miss Ven, they were her undoing." He moved toward the nearest wall, where the letters gleamed faintly under the lamplight. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured, tracing the edge of one glass frame. "So fragile, these relics of paper and ink. And yet they outlast the flesh. Miss Harrow believed her letters would keep her alive. In truth, they revealed her killers. Such irony, but such justice, Norn. Hastings looked around the room uneasily. I can't say I'd care to live surrounded by so many ghosts. Poirot straightened, adjusting his cuffs. But we all live among ghosts, Hastings. The ghosts of what we've said and what we've written, and sometimes of what we've left unsaid. Miss Harrow merely gave hers walls. He took one last look at the room, the fire casting its golden glow across the framed letters, before he turned toward the door. Come, my friend. Let us leave her in peace at last. The paper house has spoken, and its final word is silence. As they stepped into the night, the rain began to ease. Behind them, the great house stood luminous against the dark, its windows flickering faintly, as if lit from within by the ghosts of words that would never again be read. The carriage road that wound away from the Harrow estate was quiet beneath the veil of rain. Poirot and Hastings rode in silence, the wheels hissing softly over wet gravel. The paper house disappeared slowly behind them, its pale walls fading into mist, but the weight of it seemed to linger, its memories clinging like the damp to their coats. Hastings glanced sideways at Poirot, who sat with his hands folded neatly upon his cane, his expression unreadable. I can't help feeling, Hastings said finally, that no one really won in this case. Daniel, innocent of murder but ruined. Mrs. Blythe, broken by loyalty, and Miss Venn. Well, she'll hang for it, I suppose. And poor Miss Harrow. Her peace came only with death. Poirot's eyes flickered toward the window, where the reflection of the carriage lantern glowed faintly. There are no winners in such tragedies, mon ami. Only lessons written too late to be read. Yet Miss Harrow, I think, would not see herself as a victim. She achieved in the end what she sought, to be remembered. The words she left behind will live far longer than those who feared them. Hastings sighed. Do you really think she knew what would happen, that she brought it upon herself? Poirot smiled faintly. No, but she understood the danger of her own obsession. She once said, according to Mrs. Blythe, that confession and destruction are siblings, that to reveal oneself fully is also to die a little. In her house of paper, she tried to confess without consequence, but life, Hastings, does not allow such bargains. The road curved sharply, and through the rain-streaked window they passed the pond, a still, dark mirror under the silver light. Hastings watched it fade behind them. It feels wrong, somehow, leaving it all behind, he murmured. That place, it's as though it's still watching us. Poirot's voice was low, almost a whisper. Perhaps it is. The paper house is not a place easily forgotten. It was built, you see, not of wood and stone, but of gilt, and gilt does not decay. When they reached the inn in town, Poirot insisted on stopping for tea before catching the train back to London. Hastings found the idea odd, given the late hour, but Poirot seemed to crave stillness. The inn was warm and quiet, the faint smell of tobacco and rain-damp wool hanging in the air. They took a small table by the fire. Poirot stirred his tea with delicate precision, his eyes half closed. "Do you remember, Hastings?" he began softly. "The letter Miss Harrow wrote but never sent. The one that ended with the words, 'I shall tell them the truth about Daniel and about Clara.'" "Yes," Hastings said. "You proved she never meant to expose Daniel. She meant Clara all along." Poirot shook his head gently. No, my friend. You misunderstand. She meant to expose both. Daniel's greed, Clara's deceit. Two mirrors of the same vanity. But she never finished the letter because perhaps she realized it was unnecessary. The house already told her story. Every word she ever wrote was a confession waiting for the right eyes to read it. Voila. Fate provided those eyes. Mine. Hastings frowned. But what if she truly wanted to make amends? What if she had found her courage that night? Poirot looked into the fire, his expression softening. Then she would have destroyed the letters. But she could not. You see, Hastings, there are those who believe that to destroy their sins is to erase their existence. Miss Harrow feared being forgotten more than being forgiven. That was her tragedy. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the rain had ceased, and faint streaks of moonlight glimmered through the window panes. Poirot's gaze wandered, distant and reflective. "I have seen many crimes of passion," he said finally. "Jealousy, greed, vengeance, these I understand. But the crimes born of fear, of memory, those are the ones that haunt. Miss Harrow's death was not born of hatred, but of a desperate love twisted by remembrance. And what is more dangerous, mon ami, than a love that cannot forget?" Hastings watched him quietly. "You almost sound sorry for Miss Venn." Poirot sighed, setting down his cup. "I'm sorry for them all, each prisoner of their own past, each believing they could control the story, but words, once written, are like bullets once fired. They travel where they must, and they strike whom they will. Miss Venn tried to rewrite what could no longer be changed. Miss Harrow tried to preserve what should have been destroyed. And so the paper house became both a sanctuary and a tomb." The fire popped softly, sending up a brief shower of sparks. Poirot stood, adjusting his coat. "Come, Hastings, it is time to return to London. The past, after all, must not detain us too long." As they stepped out into the damp night, the street glistened beneath the pale moonlight. Hastings glanced back once toward the distant hills where the paper house stood, invisible now behind the fog. "She built her house from words," he murmured, "and in the end, it spoke for her." Poirot paused, looking toward the horizon. "Yes," he said quietly. "But remember, Hastings, words are never silent. They wait, even when all else is gone, and one day someone will read them anew and the story will begin again." He turned toward the station, his polished shoes striking softly against the cobblestones, his figure small but certain against the sprawling night. The wind rose faintly, carrying with it, for just an instant, the faint rustle of paper, like the whisper of pages turning somewhere in the dark. The end.